You might be under an emotional curse, thinking you're in a great love. That's how it was with me. I was a Christian since childhood. I felt the fire of God. But one day, I fell in love with someone who seemed like an answered prayer, and I almost lost my soul. When I realized Jezebel wasn't just a story from the Bible, she was sleeping beside me. And if you think this can't happen to you, it might already be happening. Not every toxic relationship is just emotional. Some are spiritually lethal. Stay with me until the end, because this testimony isn't just about me. It's about what might be happening to you right now, without you even noticing. I was raised in a Christian home. I grew up hearing old hymns on the kitchen radio while my mom made lunch. At 7, I was already reciting verses in children's church. I fasted on Saturdays with her, even without fully understanding what it meant. But something in me knew there was purpose in that effort. While other boys dreamed of being soccer players or artists, I dreamed of being a pastor. I wanted to see people surrender at the feet of Jesus, feeling the same fire I felt every time I knelt on the cold floor of my room. If this touches you, if some part of your story also carries this kind of fire, this surrender, this quiet pursuit, subscribe to this channel. This place was made for those who love Jesus, but also struggle to stay standing. At 21, I was already a youth leader. I prayed for the sick, counseled couples, preached at conferences. I felt God's presence like a living electricity running through my veins. There were days I literally trembled at the altar, overtaken by something I can't explain. I just know it was real. People came to me for guidance. I was seen as an example of steadfastness and consecration, and outwardly I was indeed standing, but inwardly there was a space no one could see, a silent, painful place. The wound almost no one admits to, loneliness. It wasn't the loneliness of not having friends. It was deeper, a lack of connection, that emptiness that hits even amidst noise, even surrounded by people. I was waiting for the right woman. I prayed for her. I fasted for her. I made vows, surrendered dreams, wrote letters I never sent. But time passed, and God's silence, which once taught me to wait, began to feel like abandonment. That's when a ministry friend, during a casual meeting, introduced me to a woman. Her name was Lorena. Lorena was different. She had a presence that filled the room without needing to raise her voice. Beautiful, but not just physically. She knew how to use words. Every sentence of hers was measured, intentional, as if she knew exactly what to provoke. I, who had avoided any romantic involvement until then, found myself unsettled in our first conversation. She spoke of God, knew Bible verses, said she loved worship services and praise. Everything about her seemed to fit, everything except her spirit. At first, our conversations were edifying. We exchanged voice messages about ministry, the future, family, but there was something strange. Lorena always avoided prayer times. When I invited her to seek God together, she'd say she was tired or change the subject. She never outright refused, but she dodged with subtlety. I tried to ignore it. I told myself, not everyone has the same spiritual rhythm as me. But the problem wasn't rhythm, it was resistance. It started with jokes about my fasting routine. You still do that? I thought that was something from my grandma's time. Comments about my prayer time became frequent. You talk to God more than you talk to me, you know. She'd smile while saying it, but it began to erode my mind. One day, during a more intense conversation, she let slip. Do you think you might be too spiritual? Doesn't that get exhausting? That hurt me, but I didn't say anything. I just kept it inside, and in that silence, a seed was planted. Lorena knew how to compliment. She knew how to make me feel admired, desired, valued. She'd say she had never met a man as intense, as deep as me. But after the compliments came the comparisons. You need to be more of a man and less of a believer, she'd say lightly but firmly. You're too tied to the church. The world out there is beautiful too, Daniel. I began to doubt my own choices. The fasts I once did with joy now felt like burdens. The early morning prayers were replaced by long, empty conversations, and without realizing it, I started negotiating my consecration in small installments. What scares me most, looking back, is how slowly it all happened, so that by the time I noticed, it was too late. I started stepping back from leadership. I told the pastor I needed a break. I gave excuses I even believed myself. I'm tired. I need to focus on myself. It's just a phase. But deep down, I knew I was hiding from the presence. Because every time I tried to pray, I felt dirty. I felt God calling me, but guilt made me run. And every time I thought about distancing myself from Lorena, a new declaration of love would pull me back. She'd cry, say she loved me, say she wanted to be better, and I believed her. Because when you're blind, you don't realize you're no longer walking on your own feet. The atmosphere around us began to change. I had spiritual nightmares. I'd wake up sweating, with the feeling of being watched, dreams with shadows, voices, snakes. I tried to fast, but couldn't even make it through the first day. My Bible stayed closed for weeks. What once gave me life now felt heavy, and yet I stayed in that relationship. I knew I was being destroyed, but I felt unable to leave. Love? No, it was captivity. One day during a service I attended just to accompany my mom, the pastor said something that pierced my soul. Some people traded their altar for a kiss, and now they're putting out the fire of the Spirit with emotional excuses. I knew it was for me. I tried to hide it, but I cried. Through the entire service, that word was a mirror, and when I looked into it, I no longer saw Daniel. And that's when everything truly began to crumble. If you've ever felt like you've lost your essence, write in the comments, "I want my altar back." I'll pray for each person who writes this, because I know what it's like, and I know there's a way back. I stopped attending services like I used to. I told myself it was just a phase. I was reorganizing my mind, resting from the routine, focusing on my personal life. But inside, the altar was cracking. What kept me steady, the secret discipline, the surrender in secret, the encounters with God before sunrise, had been replaced by a silence I didn't recognize. It wasn't rest, it was absence. Lorena started deciding for me. At first they were suggestions, then firm advice, and before I knew it, they were orders disguised as care. The few times we went to services, she imposed her will. "Don't talk to that brother anymore. He's jealous of you. That shirt doesn't match the man you're becoming. Better not accept that preaching invitation. That place just wants to use you." Each statement was like an invisible thread tying my hands. And the worst part? I thought that was love, that being molded by someone was a sign of partnership. But partnership doesn't erase identity, and I was losing mine. The spirit of Jezebel doesn't arrive shouting. It doesn't show up with red eyes or a deep voice. It dresses in care. It wins you over with sweet words, calm smiles, and speeches that seem protective, but soon it controls you. This subtle presence starts making decisions under the guise of the other's well-being, when in reality, it's dismantling your spiritual foundation. Jezebel doesn't want to be seen, it wants to rule, and when it finds someone tired with unresolved emotional needs, it settles in unnoticed. That's what happened to me. In the Bible, Jezebel dominated King Ahab. He was the king, but she was in charge. The title was his, but the power was hers. He signed the decrees, but she wrote them, and that's what happened to me. I still looked like the leader. I still had respect, a voice, authority, but inside, I was already a slave. My decisions were filtered through what Lorena would think. My choices no longer consulted heaven, but her eyes. And that is a form of idolatry disguised as romance. I completely distanced myself from my faith friends, those brothers who prayed with me at Dawn, who invited me to the mountain, who lovingly confronted me. I began to see them as threats. "They don't understand us," Lorena would say. "They're jealous. They want to pull you away from what's yours." I believed her. Every time someone tried to warn me, I saw it as criticism. I thought they were jealous of my relationship when in reality, they were trying to rescue me. Emotional paranoia set in without me noticing. Everything became a source of tension. If I took too long to reply to a message, I'd get a flood of texts saying I didn't care. If I went out with friends, I had to prove it with photos. If I went to church without her, I'd hear, "You only go because you want to be seen as a spiritual bachelor." I started walking on eggshells, measuring my words, controlling my steps. And the cruelest part, I thought this was taking care of the relationship, when in reality, it was captivity disguised as affection. The blame was inverted. Lorena dominated my mind with the phrase that most destroyed my spiritual freedom: "If you love me, you'll distance yourself from that church." With teary eyes, she'd say she didn't feel accepted in that environment, that she felt judged, oppressed, diminished. And to avoid hurting her, I gave in. I told myself, love requires sacrifices. But what kind of love pulls me away from the altar? What kind of love makes me choose between the cross and someone's heart? Many looked at me and said I had changed, and I had. But it wasn't just a change in behavior. It was a transfiguration of the soul. My eyes no longer held the spark of passion for God. My hands no longer lifted with spontaneity. My voice, once full of fire, now sounded rehearsed. I started having spiritual identity crises. I'd try to pray, but it felt like shouting into an empty cave. I'd fast, but it felt like hunger without purpose. I'd read the Bible, and the words seemed dull. Every now and then, a voice inside me shouted, "Come back," but it was drowned out by phrases like, "Don't destroy what we've built," or, "Are you going to trade me for a religion?" Guilt was my prison, and anyone who's been through this knows emotional imprisonment is crueler than any iron cell because it traps you from within, and the jailer is yourself. Lorena distanced me from my essence, not just from friends or ministry, but from the anointing that was in me. She'd say I was still the same, but inside, I knew I wasn't anymore. When someone pulls you away from your spiritual origin, even without saying leave God, they've already begun to extinguish your lamp. It doesn't matter if they still call you a man of God. If the oil has run dry, the symptoms started manifesting in my body. Insomnia, loss of appetite, irritation, unexplained fatigue, constant nightmares. I'd wake up sweating with a racing heart, feeling watched. And when I tried to share, Lorena would say, "That's just in your head. You're getting neurotic with this unhealthy spirituality." I started questioning myself. Was this all an exaggeration? Was the problem really with me? But the Holy Spirit doesn't give up easily. Deep down, something still burned. It was faint, like an ember hidden beneath ash, but it hadn't been extinguished. And it was that thread of light, that last breath of my faith, that made me one day lock my bedroom door, kneel, and say with all the strength I had left, "Jesus, if you're still with me, show me who's ruling my house." And that's when the spiritual realm tore open before my eyes. In your opinion, what's the biggest sign that someone is drifting away from God and hasn't even realized it yet? Comment below. I really want to know how you see this. Your answer might help awaken a life today. We had been together for 8 months, and in those 8 months, I had forgotten what peace was, what lightness felt like, what soul silence meant. This wasn't the relationship I had asked God for since I was a teenager. It wasn't what I had fasted for during so many early mornings, nor what I had written in my prayer journal. It was heavy, dense, laden with tension. I could no longer breathe spiritually. Every conversation sparked a new conflict. Small arguments turned into storms. Sharp words left invisible cuts. That night, after yet another of those discussions that had become routine, I lost the strength to argue. Lorena shouted, accused me, said I was abandoning her just because I tried to set boundaries. I didn't respond. I grabbed the key, opened the door, and left. I walked aimlessly for a few blocks and sat on the sidewalk, as if seeking shelter on the ground. I cried like a child, like I hadn't cried in a long time, but it wasn't just sadness. It was a pain that seemed to come from the soul, the kind of pain that can't be translated into words, a mix of shame, anger, helplessness, and regret. I lifted my face and stared at the sky. The moon was there, immense, and I felt small, dirty, distant, empty. I whispered softly, "Father, where did I get lost?" But there was no answer in a voice. The answer came as a weight that fell on me like a stone. It wasn't condemnation, it was repressed glory. It was the warning of a God who hadn't abandoned me, but who could no longer manifest in the midst of the deception I had chosen. After a while, I returned. Lorena didn't say a word. She looked at me with disdain and went to the bedroom. I ignored the look. I was already numb. I went to the guest room. I threw myself onto the bed without even taking off my shoes. It was late. Silence filled the house, and even with the emotional blackmail that had become part of the routine that day, I didn't have the strength to respond. Little did I know that night would mark my story forever. I woke up in another place. I knew I was dreaming, but I also knew it wasn't an ordinary dream. I saw myself in a long, narrow hallway. The walls were damp, alive, as if they were breathing. Each door on the side emitted different sounds. Screams, moans, insults, seductive voices, sarcastic laughter. It was as if each sound came from memories I had buried, phrases Lorena had said, words I had heard in the past, moments of failure I had never confessed, and that, all of that, now had a voice. I walked to the end of the hallway where there was a slightly open door. A light came through it, but it was a cold light that didn't warm. I entered. It was a large, circular room with a shadowy yet beautiful architecture. The air was thick, the smell strong, burnt incense mixed with rotting flesh. In the center of the room was a stone altar, cracked, stained with dried blood, and there, seated on a throne in front of that altar, was Lorena. She wore a long scarlet dress, her hair loose, cascading like serpents over her shoulders. She held a chalice in her hands. She didn't look at me with love. She looked at me like someone who had won. She smiled with a bitter, perverse smile, and spoke with a voice yet full of spiritual authority. "You gave me what I wanted, Daniel, your altar." I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out. My body felt heavy. My hands trembled. I looked at the floor and saw that my feet were bound by thin, almost invisible, but strong chains. Around the altar, small cracks oozed blood, and the blood came straight from the cracked altar. And in that moment, I realized that altar was my heart. I saw that above Lorena was a throne, but that throne didn't belong to her. It was mine. I had been called to govern my house, my ministry, my spiritual life. But I had abandoned everything for a toxic love. The throne that should have been occupied by the Holy Spirit was now occupied by the spirit of Jezebel, and I had signed that transfer without realizing it. Jezebel never wanted Ahab's body. She wanted dominion, control, the final say. The king still wore the crown, but he no longer had authority. He was submissive to wickedness, silent in the face of sin, weak in spirit, and that's what I had become. The walls of the room pulsed as if the space had a life of its own. Voices around me mocked. "You were so strong. Youth leader. Look where you've ended up. Where's the fire you said burned in your bones?" I felt exposed, accused, ashamed, but at the same time something inside me began to stir. A spark, a memory of who I once was, a memory of the true altar. Amid the voices, a new presence appeared, an angel. He had a stern face, eyes like burning coals, and held a sword wrapped in light. But he didn't move, he just looked at me, as if waiting for something. I understood in the spirit. He could only act when I said what needed to be said. Heaven was waiting for my surrender, and that was the moment I decided. I lifted my head, looked at the throne where Lorena sat, and with all the authority still left in me, I shouted, "Enough! As long as you tolerate Jezebel, heaven remains silent. But when you take a stand, even the angels draw their swords." At that same moment, the room shook. The altar split in two. The chalice fell from Lorena's hands, and her figure deformed before my eyes. The scarlet dress caught fire. The room was filled with a brilliant light that expelled all darkness. The angel advanced, and with a single motion, he tore the chains that bound me. I fell to my knees. The floor burned, but I felt no pain. It was as if I were being purified, reduced to dust, to be rebuilt. I woke up in the same guest room, my face wet with tears. It was still early morning. The clock read 3:14. I couldn't move my body. My breathing was heavy, but my spirit was lighter than ever. Something had been broken. Something that held me captive had been exposed and defeated. And there, in the dark, without making a sound, I renewed my vow with heaven. If this moment gave you chills, if you've ever felt this weight, this darkness, this ember burning beneath the ash, leave a like right now. Not for the video, but as a sign that there's still fire inside you. I cried out to God for guidance with a sincerity I hadn't had in months. The words didn't flow easily, but my heart bled with truth. I fasted. I rose up in spirit. I took back the reins of my life. I returned to church, but not as someone who just fills a pew. I returned as someone who finds their breath again after nearly drowning. The first weeks were a time of inner reconstruction. Every service felt like spiritual surgery. Every worship song melted me into tears. Every word from the altar stripped me bare inside, but it was necessary. The Lord's presence was pulling me out of an invisible captivity. Shame still screamed, but grace pushed me forward. I was becoming who I was born to be again. I knew I needed to set things right with Lorena. It was no longer possible to live under the same roof with the old spiritual structure that had destroyed me. I called her for a serious conversation, as a man, as a priest, as someone who now clearly heard God's voice. I set rules, firmly but in peace. I told her that if we were to continue, it would be the right way, that the house would no longer be governed by manipulation, but by eternal principles. I placed the Bible between us, and without fear, without hesitation, I read aloud passages that confront, that cleanse, that break chains. Lorena looked at me in shock. She wasn't used to my stance. She had always known me as vulnerable, confused, divided, but now she saw a man standing firm, full of authority. She tried to argue, but when she realized I wouldn't budge, she threw out the phrase that revealed everything. "It's either me or this archaic faith of yours." I felt struck in the chest, but it was the final proof that this decision was spiritual. Without lowering my eyes, I responded with conviction. I would never let go of my God's hand. This is who I am. Lorena's eyes widened. For the first time, she saw that her influence had been broken. She tried one last tactic. "Doubt, are you sure about this?" I just nodded. I signaled yes, with serenity but without any opening. "If you don't want to walk in the principles of the word, I can't allow your presence to derail my house." She stood up. She began gathering her things. The atmosphere grew heavy, as if something invisible was being dethroned there. Until the very last moment, she tried to turn the situation around. She said I was being cruel, cold, fanatical, but something inside me stayed firm. For the first time, I was seeing with open spiritual eyes. The same spirit that met me in the vision now sustained me. Lorena left. I watched that door close, and with it, I felt a snap in my chest. My heart broke into pieces, because despite everything, there was still love. I spent nights on my knees crying and interceding, not for the restoration of the relationship, but for liberation, for her soul. I knew that what dwelt there wasn't Lorena. I knew that behind all the manipulation was a wounded soul, imprisoned, shaped by darkness long before she met me. I kept praying every day, fasting, crying out, but I never sought news of her again. I guarded myself. I hid in God. I didn't want to get involved with anyone else. I dove into ministry with even greater surrender. It was as if I had been recommissioned with a new fire. Time passed, 6 months of absolute silence, but my spirit never stopped crying out. One Sunday, at the end of the service, I saw a familiar face among the visitors. The eyes were the same, but the countenance wasn't. Lorena was there, standing, alone, without heavy makeup, without that domineering posture. Her shoulders slightly slumped, but with a new light in her eyes. When our eyes met, I felt something in my spirit, not passion but peace. We greeted each other respectfully. I asked where she had been, if everything was okay. She smiled with tears held back and said, "Forgive me, Daniel. I was wrong. I was used. And I had to hit rock bottom to understand." I stayed silent, listening to every word. I had an encounter with God, not a service, not an emotion, a confrontation. He visited me. He stripped me bare inside, and he set me free. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, as if confirming that something greater was in control. We didn't get back together. Not that day. I needed proof. I needed to see fruit. I believed what I saw, but I waited. 4 months passed, and each week I saw a new Lorena being born. I saw her serve, clean the church floor, evangelize on the streets, fast, seek spiritual counsel. I saw humility where there was once pride. I saw tears where there was once manipulation. When I realized her heart had truly been touched, not by me but by God, then yes, we prayed together, not out of passion, but for purpose. And this time, everything was different. We sought guidance. We held vigils together. We fasted for the same reasons. And in a simple service, without fanfare, without show, we heard heaven's yes. We married shortly after, without a grand party, but with a presence so strong that everyone there wept. Today we are 2 restored souls, not a perfect couple, but a liberated couple. We live with purpose. We cry together, pray together, and care for people with the same compassion God once used to reach us. That's when I understood that sometimes God doesn't bring perfect people together. He restores the wounded, and when the altar is put back in its place, even Jezebel becomes a testimony. If you believe God can still restore stories, relationships, and identities, comment below. God still writes endings that heal. Let's fill this section with declarations of faith. Someone needs to read what you'll write today. You watching this, you might be exactly where I was, in an intense relationship, full of emotions. that feels like love, but is pulling you away from who you are in God. And maybe you haven't realized yet, but this could be an emotional prison disguised as affection. Pay attention. Anything that disconnects you from God's presence, steals your peace, slows your spiritual life, is a trap. No matter how beautiful it looks on the outside, the enemy sends people too, and he knows how to disguise them well. Sometimes he doesn't show up with ugliness or violence, but with sweet words, promises, and even Bible verses on their lips. That's why prevention starts at the altar. It starts with daily, sincere prayer, where you ask, Lord, close the doors I can't see. Keep me from entering paths that seem like love but lead to ruin. Don't trust your heart alone, it's deceptive. Trust the Holy Spirit. Seek counsel from mature, faith-filled people, leaders who know you, who love you enough to tell the truth, even if it hurts. If someone living in the Spirit warns you, listen. God always gives signs, but it's up to you to decide whether to ignore or obey. And before you give yourself emotionally, ask for heaven's approval. Don't start something without the blessing of the one who knows the end from the beginning. When a relationship is from God, there's peace, purpose, spiritual alignment. And if everything contradicts the principles of the Word, that's already your answer. Anything that strays from the principles is a trap. If this word spoke to you, comment with a fire emoji below. Write the name of the person you'll pray for today. Share this with someone who needs to break free from this kind of captivity. Don't keep this truth to yourself. Someone needs to open their eyes today. And never forget, relationships can lead you to God's altar or pull you away from it. Pray, stay vigilant, seek counsel, test the fruit, wait on God. Because it's not about starting with someone, it's about finishing with Christ.